This is a Momentum Media production.
Welcome to the Smart Property Investment Show, the podcast by investors for investors.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day you are listening in. Welcome back to a brand new episode of the Smart Property Investment Show. And as that intro does say, we are all about the investors. And today we have a very special guest because investors are going through it right now. I think it's fair enough to say. I've got Tim McKibbin joining me on the Zoom call today. Tim, thank you so much for taking the time.
Great to be here, Grace. Thanks for the opportunity.
Tim, you are the CEO of the Estate Institute of New South Wales, and obviously we have an election coming up here in New South Wales later this month, now that the months have ticked over into March. There's always a lot going on in politics, but especially at this point in time, you know, we're in the last 3-week run into an election and there's lots of promises and policies flying around everywhere, and it comes against the backdrop of increasing, you know, issues with housing. Housing has become a really core topic of this election, and we're going to talk a little bit more to that later in the show. But before we do, in your position at the Estate Institute, you've got a real helicopter view of what's going on with property across the state. Can you talk us through what you're seeing at the moment?
Yeah, so I think what has happened over the last 12 months or so is the problem has gotten worse. Now, there's all these symptomatic responses from government and other stakeholders in the market, but conceptually the problem is very easy to understand, and that is we simply don't have enough property. We don't have enough property for those people aspiring to be owner-occupiers or similarly those people that are looking for rental property. And rent pegging and freezing rents and these sorts of things, which has been touted of late, isn't going to solve the supply problem. And you know, it is quite ludicrous when you sit back and think about it that by freezing rents, we're somehow going to be able to find more property for the community. Now, what's happened over the last 12 months is we've seen the pandemic thankfully behind us, and we've opened up for immigration, and we've had the biggest intake of immigrants into Australia ever. I think it was in the latter part of last year. And earlier this year, so I think it's probably the latter part of February, we had 50,000 Chinese students who have also come back into the country. Now, the reality of it is that a human being needs 3 things. They need food, they need water, and they need shelter. So everybody needs to find somewhere to live. And as a consequence of that, if there is insufficient supply and the demand is continuing to grow, you are going to push prices up in the rental market. That's what's happening right now.
So from that point, Tim, especially, you know, looking back to what we saw in the federal election last year, so many promises then to make housing more affordable. Housing affordability hasn't just become a problem overnight. Anthony Albanese's promises did surround the fact that, you know, he would be bringing in 1 million new homes over the next before 2030, the next 6 or 7 years. But the issue's here now, isn't it?
Yeah, so we need to build approximately 42,000 new dwellings a year in New South Wales, and we're building less than half of that. So year on year, the problem is getting bigger, and year on year, the queues down the street to acquire the available property are getting longer. So building 1 million properties over the next years until 2030 is great. But they're not talking about an additional 1 million properties. As I understand, they're talking about 1 million properties that are going to be built by developers anyway. So that sounds great, but I think in many respects they're just taking the credit for building activity that would have taken place anyway. One of the biggest problems we have is council getting things approved through councils. It can regularly take, and this is amazing, and as I say this, I'm shaking my head, but it can take longer to get your development application process, get it through council, than it takes to build the property. Now, that happened. That is utterly ridiculous. And that is an area where we need to be looking at some efficiencies. And we need to be at a state and federal government, I think, incentivising councils that are able to streamline that process, are able to make those decisions faster. The other thing that I keep pounding this drum because I think it's very important for consumers to be aware of it. And government talks affordability but acts with tax. And by that I mean every level of government taxes new property, and therefore that flows through the market to the second and third sales of the same property. And again, the amount of tax and charges that the consumer pays when they buy new property is 40% plus. So let's put some numbers on that so I can do the maths in my head. If you buy a property for $1 million, $400,000 of that is government taxes and charges. 400,000. So your government can't talk about affordability being one of their key goals if they are inflating the price by 400,000 by 40%. And I find those sort of comments coming out of government completely disingenuous.
So how much of it do you think is a planning issue, the fact that we do have, vacancy rates below 1% across much of the state right now?
As I said at the beginning, the problem we have is supply of property. Everything else that is circulating in the market right now are simply symptoms of that problem and are in some respects, people that have to take responsibility for the lack of supply, trying to divert the attention of the community away from that failure to bring more property to the market. That's what's happening right now. Now, if we look at what's going on in the rental market, we've had bans on rental bidding. Now, that of itself is an interesting one because we have to say to ourselves, rather than banning rental bidding, I think the first inquiry should be, why is there rental bidding? So an agent says in an advertisement that we want $500 by way of example for this property, and there's a big long line down the street, as we know, and someone gets to the front of the queue and says to the agent, I'll pay $550. So it's not the agent that is conducting a rental bidding war for the property. It is consumers. It is would-be tenants that are desperate to find a property. They're the people that are driving rent bidding. And if you want to stop rent bidding, bring more property to market. That's how you solve that. And as said earlier about rent freezes and all of these sorts of things, they are all designed, in my opinion, to divert the community's attention away from the core problem and the core failure of bringing enough property into the market. So I think government, and for that matter, the opposition, have identified that 1/3 of our population are tenants. 1/3 of our population in New South Wales are tenants, and therefore their vote is critical. And consequently, both of the major parties are looking to capture those votes. But unfortunately, what they're doing is driving investment away from the sector. So we have landlords who are looking at the what's happened and looking at the direction of where the relationship between the landlord and tenant is going. And we know that, and the data tells us very clearly, that landlords are selling and putting their money elsewhere. The really sad irony of this is that when the landlord sells the property, because of the changes to the tenancy relationship, the real loser here, the big loser, are tenants, because the landlord is an investor. And I don't think that is well recognised, that they are investors or well accepted. And they simply pick up their money and they put it elsewhere. We see people taking their rental property into the holiday and short-term rental market, where they maintain greater control over their property. And in some respects, many respects, they are getting a better rental return. So again, we have to be saying to ourselves, why do we have these problems? And enacting more and more tenant-friendly laws that are driving investment away, is that the best strategy for tenants? And I think clearly no.
It's a really good point to be thinking about right now. We're going to take a quick break there. We'll come back in just a moment to really put that into perspective with the upcoming election. Thanks, Tim. See you on the other side of the break. Welcome back to this episode of the Smart Property Investment Show. I am joined by Real Estate Institute of New South Wales CEO Tim McKibbin. And Tim, before the break, we alluded to the election, and obviously that is looming now. There is a lot of talk going around. What are your thoughts on it at the moment and where we're at right now?
The position that we're taking is to go in and fight for the market.
Yeah.
Now, what we are regularly accused of is being the landlord's advocate. There's plenty of advocates out there for tenants, but they're being the landlords. We're certainly not the landlord's advocate. We are the advocate for the market. We want a vibrant market. We want tenants to have choice in the market. We want to see landlords getting a good return on their investment. We want to see the rental market being something that will attract investment rather than drive it away. That's good. That's good for consumers. It's good for landlords, and consequently, it's good for the property services industry.
Yeah,
I mean,
cool.
one of the guiding lights that we have at the REI is to look at any market, any circumstance, and we say to ourselves, what is good for the consumer is good for the market and is good for the property services industry. So we put the consumer at the centre of everything we do. And our consumers here now are the tenant and the landlord. And also, I note on too many occasions that people don't recognise that the landlord is also a consumer. And again, people tend to think that landlords are super wealthy people with multiple properties. The truth, however, is that 83% of landlords own just one property. And those people are either dependent on the rent so that they can make the payments on their mortgage, on the loan that they have for the property, or they're retired and they are dependent on the rent to pay for their living expenses. So they're not super wealthy people. They are mum and dad investors. That's what they are. And when you talk about rent freezes and these sorts of things, that frightens people because, as you know, the interest rates have gone up and people's repayments in some instances have doubled or worse. And we have the Greens and some other stakeholders in the market talking about rent freezes. Well, that frightens the investors. I also make the observation that whilst there is 1/3 of the New South Wales population are tenants, and I think that obviously the tenants' rights, we are great supporters of that. We're great supporters of the market. We like to see a fair market, a market where everybody's interests are recognised and respected. But for every tenant, there is a landlord. So to seek the tenant's vote, as we see the major parties doing, they're not recognising that every tenant has a landlord and every landlord votes as well. So I wouldn't be too quick to discard the landlords out there and say you're not an important consideration.
Now that we're only a couple of weeks really out from this election, Tim, what are you seeing? We've just talked about that they're kind of ignoring the investor vote. I know that you at the Real Estate Institute of New South Wales are trying to do some work to see what that actual sentiment is. But because we're seeing, landlords that are leaving the marketplace, and that's not what you want. And it's not what anyone wants because it's going to effectively reduce the supply even more. Do you have any idea what that sentiment might be like?
Yeah, we've been doing or conducting surveys of both property managers and landlords over the last 2 weeks. And that the data that's coming through is supporting our concerns and is supporting the anecdotal evidence that we're getting from auctioneers, by way of example. They're telling me that a lot of the auctions they're conducting now are investor properties, landlords selling their properties. So that's been reinforced by the data that we're seeing coming through. And the surveys are saying, yes, if you are selling, why are you selling? And are you considering selling in 2023 and why? And so we've been gathering that data. If we're going to take a position on something, we always want to have quality data behind us. And we're in the process of compiling that data. And over the next couple of weeks, we'll be making our position clear, as we always do. And we will be backed up by our data.
And that survey is still going on, and it's open for all investors and property managers, isn't it, across the state?
Yes, that's right. We are getting a fantastic response to it. But everybody that completes the survey value adds to our data. So I would encourage people to do that. If they can find themselves a couple of minutes to do it, we would be most grateful.
It's very cool that you're literally giving people out there the opportunity to hopefully shape, what policy looks like in the next government moving forward from here.
Yeah, we would like to think that we will influence policy going forward. And again, we want to influence policy because we want a vibrant market. And we fear that if there are politically popular policies enacted, then it will damage the market. And once again, I have to make the point here, the big loser here will be tenants and our tenants. For every landlord that sells, that's one less property in the market. And we've got organic growth of population in New South Wales. We have an enormous amount of immigrants that have come in. And we also have the Chinese students that are coming in. Now, that to me is great news, having additional people that are coming into the country. The Chinese students obviously are coming in, spending their money here. And that is a good thing. But we've got to be able to house them when they arrive. And if we can't do that, it is a problem. I made the point earlier that a human being needs those food, water and shelter. You've got to have that. And people are missing out on opportunities because they can't find somewhere to live. I heard last week a couple of instances where a person had found their dream job in a particular location and they wanted to move to that location to take up the position, but couldn't find anywhere to live. They couldn't find anywhere to live. So what we're seeing are social problems and economic problems outside of the rental shortage flowing through the community. And again, that's something I think that isn't well documented and isn't well understood, but it is there and it is flowing through the community.
I'm just thinking now, Tim, about all the people that are probably listening along and we've got a very active investor base here at the Smart Property Investment Show. And I know a lot of people are always looking for that next opportunity to invest. And it's a bit of a double-edged sword, isn't it? In that it sounds like it's not the nicest environment to be, setting up an investment property in. But at the same time, there are so many opportunities purely because of the pressure that is currently in the market at the moment.
You're absolutely right. Because of the demand in the market right now, an investment property is being snapped up very quickly. I had a couple of instances where agents said to me that they had sold a property and they were contacted by people who wanted a rental property and they said, we're aware that you've sold 10 Smith Street, for example, and those people that have bought that property, are they investors? If they are, can you introduce me to them and I want to talk to them about renting their property. Now, that's how desperate people are out there. So if you do buy a rental property, I don't like giving investment advice, but I would say that if you buy a rental property, you are not going to have any trouble finding a tenant. And I think also that if the tenancy laws move in a more, as appears to be the case, in a more tenant-friendly environment, selecting a good tenant is going to be the most important step in establishing the relationship with that person. So, you want a good relationship with your tenant. And I make the point also that during COVID, whilst our landlords are painted as these super wealthy, unfeeling individuals, during COVID, a lot of landlords who could afford it, who said to their tenants, we will grant you, voluntarily, they said, we'll grant you some concessions because you're having difficulties with your job, having difficulties paying your rent. So we will do that. We're not talking one or two here. We're talking thousands of people who did that. They weren't forced to do it by government. They voluntarily did that. So, again, mum and dad investors with hearts understood what was happening in the market. But why are rents going up? Well, it's not because of greedy landlords. rents are going up because we don't have enough property. That's what's driving rents up. I had someone try to explain to me recently that it was appropriate to put rents up because the increase in interest rates and all that, it's got absolutely nothing to do with it. The landlord's problems have nothing to do with the rent. The people who set the rent of a property are tenants in competition. That's who sets the rent. It's a bit like who sets the price of property in a sale. Well, the people who set the price of property are purchasers. They're not agents, not vendors, purchasers. And if anyone doubts that, you can go to an auction and watch them do it. It's very, very clear who's setting the price. Now, yes, the agent will have a view about what the property should achieve at market from their experience. They'll have an opinion. The vendor will have some aspirations about what they want for their property. But at the end of the day, it is the purchasers that set the price. And they don't care, and it is irrelevant about what the vendor wants for their property or why the vendor may need a particular price for their property to satisfy some other debts and problems that they may have or to be able to buy another property. That's all of the vendor's issues are irrelevant. It is about the amount of people that are in competition are prepared to pay for that property. Now, the same thing is happening with rents. It is the tenants that are setting the rents. I saw during COVID in Piedmont that when it was said we all have to work from home, a lot of people live in Piedmont because, it's a funky area to live, I suppose, and it's close to the city and what have you. So rents in the Piedmont area are quite high, not surprisingly. But during COVID, when we all had to work from home, there wasn't a lot of interest in living in Piedmont because you were just going to be staring at your four walls. So you might be, tenants made the view that I might as well go and live in a more affordable area, and they did. And we saw vacancy rates in Piedmont go up, in the 10 to 15%. Now, when that happened, rents came down sharply in those areas because rents had to come down to be able to attract tenants. But whilst the queues are lined up down the street, Grace, whilst they are, what's going to be happening is rents will be going up. And until government, whichever political party form government, unless they take on the core problem that we simply need more property.
We'll be back after another break. See you on the other side. Welcome back to this episode of the Smart Property Investment Show. I am joined by the CEO of the Real Estate Institute for New South Wales, Tim McKibbin. Tim, it's been a very enlightening conversation so far. And obviously this election is looming quite quickly. I would encourage everyone who is listening, whether you're an investor or a property manager, to jump on and do that survey. How can they access that, Tim?
It is on our website, and we do have a number of people that are pushing the link out through their channels. I don't know, Grace, whether or not it can go out through your connections, but I'd be most grateful if it could, because as far as I understand it, it is the only opportunity in the market for landlords to have a voice. And for that reason, we're trying to engage with as many industry stakeholders that we can and who have channels out to the market. And, through doing that, we want to capture as much information. We want to provide people with the opportunity to be heard. And we have another opportunity there for people to write to their local member and essentially say, I'm a landlord and I vote. And that's the message we want to get across.
We'll see what we can do with that link, Tim. And I would just encourage everyone who really is affected by whatever legislation comes through, whatever policies are being put in place across the state, to get involved. Because as I always say anyway, Tim, there's no point whinging if you've not taken any steps to put yourself out there and have your voice heard. So just such a great opportunity there. And I'd love to hear, Tim, if you don't mind, what would happen moving forward in an ideal world, policy-wise, in the property market in New South Wales?
There needs to be, and again, I'm talking construction here because that really is the only solution, just more property. I'm sorry I keep saying that, but,
no, but
whilst I take your point that there's no good whinging if you don't present the solution, and that is the solution. But I think what we need to be doing is to providing the consumer with choice. If we go back all those years back when I was looking at buying a property, my first house, there was only one choice really. You bought a freestanding home on a quarter-acre block. That was the Australian dream, and that's what I did. But since that time, all those thousands of years ago, what's happened since then is people want different housing solutions. So I currently live in a townhouse, and I think it's great. I've got a tiny little courtyard, which enables me to go out and sit in the courtyard, so I get a bit of outside opportunity. And the townhouse is as big as the home I had previously, which is great. I think that's a great way to live. Not everybody would, but I think that's a great way to live. I really don't need the opportunity to mow a heap of lawns on Saturday mornings. That's not doing it for me, but other people would have a different attitude. And again, I think we need to be looking to build high quality, let me say that again, high quality, higher density living opportunities. That's what we need to be doing, and taking advantage of the existing infrastructure. So we're looking at infill and looking at obviously taking advantage of some of the brownfield sites. We can't keep moving west and increasing the size of Sydney, because every time we do that, we put pressure on infrastructure, and that has flow-on social problems. So for those people living in the far western suburbs of Sydney and having to commute each day into the city is placing enormous costs on people, and it is impacting their health. And something, again, that I think people don't realise what is happening beyond the obvious, which is having to find somewhere to live. But people are having health issues because they're spending so much time in public transport and not spending enough time getting some exercise as they would like to be able to do. And you have people leaving home when it's dark in the winter, getting home when it's dark. So it is just not a good use of somebody's time to be spending 2 or 3 hours each way commuting to work. It's unhealthy, and it's not a good use of people's time.
And it's something that's really come to the fore, I guess, in the past couple of years due to COVID. Not that I want to keep talking about COVID, but it has really made people realise that that's really unhealthy.
Yeah, I completely agree. COVID has shaken up the property market, and again, it's a pertinent reminder of just how important property is to our world. You can do without your overseas holiday and your new car, but you've got to have somewhere to live. But what's happening now is people are moving out of the major centres. So Sydney, for example, they're moving out into the regional areas because they're able to work from home. And those places that are sort of 150 to 200 kilometres from Sydney enable people to work from home but still be within striking distance of Sydney. So if you only have to come into the office one day a fortnight or one day every month or 3 weeks, as the case may be, that opens up the world to you, really. And I have employees at the REI that had to move overseas for a variety of reasons, and we've been able to continue their employment overseas because they're able to do their job from overseas, and we have the ability to talk to them on using the technology. So they're able to discharge their employment duties, but offshore. So these sorts of things are happening every day and throughout most businesses. And that is now creating, as people were saying, the new normal. And I think we're still trying to get used to the new normal and what the new normal is doing to the property market.
I mean, some of this conversation has been quite negative around, some of the changing laws and just the fact that there isn't enough supply out there, Tim. But there are so many opportunities now with that new normal that comes along with it. Does it feel like it's the perfect time to even, really put pressure on government and the people that, can make these changes?
I'm sorry it's come across negative. I just sort of, I guess I'm dishing it up as it is, but I don't wish to be negative. I love property. My wife is a commercial property lawyer. It's about the only thing we have an understanding of. So that's where we do our investing. So I don't wish to come across in a negative way, but I'm just growing very weary of the politics that is around the property industry. It is so important to everybody that it becomes a political tool and not something where we see good policy. We don't, and unfortunately, that's what we're seeing now. But there always has been, and I believe always will be, great opportunities in investing in property. I don't really understand the equities market and some of those other derivatives. So property is for me first and foremost.
Well, there you go. What a great way to end the podcast. And Tim, thank you so much for your time today. I really, really appreciate you sharing your thoughts. And again, I would encourage everyone to check out that survey and make their voice heard. It is a very pertinent time to be doing so. And hopefully in a few weeks, Tim, you can share some of the findings with us. We'll get you back on another show.
Yeah, be very happy to, Grace.
Great. Looking forward to it already. Tim, thank you again so much for your time, the CEO of the Real Estate Institute of New South Wales there. To everyone who has been listening along, we hope you have enjoyed this episode. Like or review us on whatever platform that you do listen to your podcast on. If you have any questions, don't hesitate. Reach out, editor@smartpropertyinvestment.com.au. Check us out on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. That is all we have time for today. Until next episode, stay safe and well wherever you are listening from. Bye-bye.
The information featured in this podcast is general in nature and does not take into consideration your financial situation or individual needs and should not be relied upon. Before making any investment, insurance, tax, property or financial planning decision, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you. Guests appearing on this podcast may have a commercial relationship with the companies mentioned.